Hey everyone, Monkley Douglas Bartholomew Reginald Esquire the Fourth here, and what I have for you today is a video on my experiences with the Mechanist during the Guild Wars 2 beta preview in raids. I'm going to do a couple of videos on my experiences with this. I already did a video talking about all of the issues I saw with the Untamed, and second to the Untamed, this was the most interesting class to me that I wanted to try out, and oh boy did it get its hooks at me. So the first thing I tried, which will be the focus of this video, is I took the Mechanist into a PvE environment, which was raiding. We went right into raids. I took a bunch of random people from my Twitch chat, so it was borderline a pug. Many of them were playing roles that they were unfamiliar with, some of them on beta characters, some of them just trying out new classes since we were all testing things anyway. So, you know, it was kind of clunky, but we got stuff done and I got to try out a lot of stuff. So without further ado, let's just dive into what I made. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is role compression. Basically, how many jobs can you give to one person? As a quick example, if you have a heal brand, usually they are the quickness provider and they also are the healer for their party. It can also, in a pinch, give out stability and block projectiles, things like that. And that's taking all those roles and putting it into one spot. If your healer was, for example, a druid, you would have to get your quickness somewhere else. I wanted to see how much role compression I could do and tried to push that to its limits. What we have here is a tank, healer, and Alacrity, literal Alacrity, and also supplies barrier. And I'll show you how I did that. So first off, this was the build I made. As a quick example, if you look at these traits here, if we go over here, this is an example of the Scrapper healing build that I have a video of already. I essentially took the first two trait lines, copied them over, and then we added in the Mechanist. Now, what we are running currently is increase healing while using a med kit, grant regen to people when you cleanse them, purity of purpose, give a boon to people you cleanse, grant protection from allies when you use a shield skill, allowing you to give out some protection to your team, soothing detonation, heal nearby allies when you use a tool belt skill. Now, I have tested this, and these buttons up here, which control the mech, actually count as tool belt skills when you don't have a tool belt. As to further show that here, if I put tools here, one of the things that tools does is gives you 15% reduced recharge on tool belt skills. Right here, if you look, 12 3/4 recharge, 34, 25. If I go back to what the spec was, that 12 becomes 15, 40, and 30. So it is absolutely considering these to be tool belt skills. And lastly, medical dispersion field. For the average healing engineer, this is the #1 source of healing you put out. Essentially, any heals you do that hit you, 50% of that is copied and hit to other people. So for the Mechanist, all these traits, you honestly really have three choices. You go the whole first row for condition damage, the whole second row for support, and the whole third row for power. The second trait in the support row is the one that gives Alacrity, but it's also the one that gives the mech your healing power and concentration. Because of that, if you were to be, let's say you're like, oh, I'm Condi, but I'll provide Alacrity, your mech does not get your condition damage and expertise, and its damage will be much, much lower. I don't think it is feasible or viable to have a DPS Mechanist supplying the Alacrity for a group. But for a support, it's basically just baked in for free. As a quick example of that, I'm gonna run up to this guy here and just start hitting him, and I'm just going to have my pet use a few of his abilities here, and we're gonna look at my boons, and we have got almost 30 seconds of Alacrity, and it is just going to be continuously pulsing, and as long as he's attacking, that's, I mean, look how slowly it's going down. Like, it's just sitting at 29, 28, 29. It doesn't drop quickly. Also, might stacks at 25 when I'm sitting here not even pressing buttons, and a healthy amount of vigor and fury and a few other boons as well. Now, what did I lose from leaving Scrapper? We lost the ability to give our group super speed, quickness, but we gained Alacrity, and we lost the ability to give them stability, which is commonly used by taking Bulwark Gyro and using Defense Field. Many of you will recognize it's the skill that looks like that gives your group stability. There's not a way to do that with the Mechanist, and you lose the ability to send a gyro out to res people far away that are in trouble, which is very useful for certain content. Now, one major thing that you lose is related to the medkit. Medkit with medical dispersion field. The medkit, when you use it, all it does is equip and unequip the medkit. For those of you that don't play engineer, you might be thinking, well, where did your heal skill go? It goes to the F1 key. And guess what we lost? When you go to Mechanist, your F1 key is now pet use its first attack. It is not a heal. So if you take medkit and you're a mechanist, you have no self-heal. Now that self-heal, if we look at it, is roughly, let's say 6,200 heal every 17 seconds, but every time you heal yourself, half that is copied to surrounding allies, so you could say it's a 3k heal on allies every 17 seconds. So we lose that. What do we get in trade? In exchange for that, we get constant pulsing barrier every 3 seconds from barrier burst. It will supply 816 barrier with my current healing power, which would go up if I had food buffs and stuff like that, every 3 seconds to my party. Additionally, every third hit of my mace puts out 816 barrier to my party. Additionally, we can supply barrier with barrier signet and also with the barrier burst activatable. So in addition to the constant pulsing barrier from the Metcore barrier engine and from my own mace auto attacks, just by using the F3 and the barrier signet in a pinch, it's going to push out about 10,000, almost 11,000 barrier. And you can use those abilities together, or you can use them separately depending on when you need them. The barrier signet is also projectile block, and barrier burst I was using pretty much on cooldown because of all the wonderful boons it provides as well. So you don't have a self-heal, but you do have this massive barrier pulsing out constantly, and while I was tanking raid bosses, I never really felt like I was hurting because I did not have a self-heal skill. So that made this completely okay. Now I ended up taking barrier signet here for the skills because of the barrier it puts out, as well as projectile block and a nice passive as well. The other two felt like flex slots. I used Elixir Gun just so I could occasionally swap to it, use Elixir Gun 5 just for a big heal, or the 3 to cure conditions on my party, but we don't have the Elixir Gun tool belt skill, so that was all we got from it. And Shift Signet was useful because currently the pet AI, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, is really rough, and this allowed me to reposition my pet, but this absolutely could be traded for something else. When I was fighting Samurag, where we needed more interrupts, I swapped this out for Personal Battering Ram and was able to do a lot of damage to the boss's break bar by just doing Personal Battering Ram into Mace 3 and then into Battering Ram again, or healing people that needed healing at that time. For the elite skill, I did use Overclock Signet for all the raids. It reduces the cooldown of all the signets by 20%. The activatable laser beam was pretty crappy if you're running support because it just does flat damage, so it was very low damage for me. So I only activated it when the mech died, which only happened on Veil Guardian if we had a second green come down before we had finished recovering our health from the first green. So most of the time it just sat there reducing the cooldown of barrier signet and letting me use it more often. I touched on this earlier, but talking about the specific boons that this build can provide, you can, just by seeing this stuff here, you will end up getting a permanent Alacrity, 25 stacks of might. Once the pet gets going, it needs to hit the target for a few seconds to build that up, but you will end up with max stacks of might. Permanent vigor, just Mace 2 gives permanent vigor, but you also get vigor from barrier burst as well, and you can also swap to medkit periodically and tap your shield skills to pulse out a large amount, but not 100% uptime, of regeneration, swiftness, and protection. But the vigor, the alacrity, the 25 stacks of might, those are 100% uptime. The prot, fury, regen, and swiftness is most of the time. And as you can see here, I'm even standing in a damage field, and it's whatever. There's just the non-stop barrier generation is completely negating it, even though I have no self-healing besides the regen right now. It's not even kicking in because just we've got so much barrier at the moment. So those are the boons that this guy provides. You've also got the projectile block as well if you need that. And my current build is using a mixture of givers and minstrel's gear, similar to what I like to run on my scrapper when I tank heal raids, and I was tank healing. This wasn't even ideal because there was a few important sigils that I forgot to put in my bank before the beta test started. So I even ran this with missing one sigil. I was just using birthday cake for food buffs during the raid. things like that. So it was not perfected, but it was absolutely viable. Now, so far I've talked about what a great time I had on the Mechanist. Let's talk about the problems that I had. The main thing is something I talked about a lot in the Untamed video, but I'll go over it as if you haven't watched that for people only interested in Engineer. It was the pet AI. This bar right here is not the same as a Ranger's pet AI bar. There's a couple of bugs right now. One is that if you rename your pet and then your pet dies or you have to summon a new one for any reason, it will reset and its name resets. So at one point during the raid, there was multiple mechanists there. I tried to rename my pet to keep a better eye on where its position was, because like if it's doing this and pulsing out Alacrity, I need to make sure it's standing on top of the group. And it got kind of frustrating a few times because I could not see where, which pet it was at a glance. I did not have that issue with this move. This move is very obvious, but at the same time, it's not jarring. This is perfect. But funny enough, the arguably stronger skill, which is this one, was almost impossible to spot under a whole pile of people fighting a raid boss. Now, at this time, we cannot hotkey pet attack or pet return to me. I can click it, and there's a few times in raiding that, we were on one side of a very fat boss and he was on the other, and I clicked pet attack to bring him over to me, and then the next time that I was able to tell him to do like an explosive knuckle, I was able to use that order to get him to, fight the boss again and get him start punching again. Those issues would completely go away, assuming they patch in the ability to, once again, because Ranger had this before Untamed, assign a hotkey to pet attack and pet return. That would solve most of the problems I had, and also it would probably mean I wouldn't need to use shift signet to do things like, move the pet 10 feet to get him on top of the group just so that we can emit a barrier on top of the party. But I did have that issue during the raid. It was a very conscious effort to make sure the pet was on top of the party, whereas I foresee in a future where if he's on the wrong side of the boss, I can just hit pet return, pet attack, and then he'll be with a group of people, and then he's emitting those boons again, as he should be. Another minor note is the Scrapper Healer. When you've got a medkit in your hand, if on a really dicey fight, if you're having to use the medkit 90% of the time, you're doing 0 damage. Literally 0. It does not do damage. So at the end of the fight, it'll say that you did like 100 DPS on the meter. But this guy, even if you have to go full medkit the whole time, because the pet's hitting most of the time, other than when he is using this skill here, he will push out like 2 to 3k DPS. Now, obviously that's really bad, but for a healer, that's just free damage added to the raid, so that's nice. So that's a small advantage to them. So another issue I had with the pet is the number of skills it has. So whatever you take in the first column is F1, whatever you take in the second column is F2, the third column is F3. Fine. Additionally, this passive here gives the pet a skill called Rocket Punch. It uses every 25 seconds. You have no control over that. And the skill right here gives the pet a thing called Jade Siphon. It uses every 15 seconds. You have no control over that. Those are both fine. But there was an issue. On a Ranger, if a pet is in the middle of doing something, let's say a Jacaranda is calling down lightning, and then you order it to root someone, it will stop what it's doing, interrupt its cast, and try to do the command you gave. The mech won't currently. So the mech, sometimes I would hit a skill, I'd be like, hey, do barrier burst, and it wouldn't. And I'd keep mashing the key, and it would finish doing like Jade Siphon or whichever one of its own skills it was in the middle of. Then I could give it an order if I was able to squeeze it in before it started its next, Rocket Punch. So that's something that in my mind just needs to be fixed. Your orders should supersede, especially when it's an emergency shield for the party, should supersede the things that it's just spamming on its own. The next thing was that the pet does not leash. I'm going to use the explosive knuckle to get my pet to attack this thing, and I am going to run over here, and although in raids this was almost never an issue, in PvP this became a problem. Rangers cannot get this far from their pets without the pet just like suddenly teleporting and rubber banding to you. It's not allowed to be that far away. But I flat out lost my golem a couple of times in environments outside of the raid setting. I won't talk about that much more than what I just said because I think that kind of drives the point home. It doesn't affect a raid much, but inside of the like PvP or open world, like I could see the pet was alive or I could see it dying, but I had lost the thing because it doesn't leash right now. The next issue I had in the general sense, take a look at Force Signet. If you're running the Elite Signet, Overclock Signet, it reduces the cooldown of this, making this a 24-second stun break. Pretty nice. It also gives some power, can't complain about that, and it does a little bit of damage and a knockback. It's got a cast time I cannot remember the last time I played a class where the signet, where the stun break has a cast time. And that threw me off a few times. When I tried to stun break and immediately go into another move, and then I would interrupt my own stun break. And I was like, wait, what? Or just the stun break might go off, and then the other thing doesn't go off. And I was really confused about that till I realized it has a cast time. Feels weird. I could get used to it if that's by design choice, but I talked to my chat, and there was a couple people that are like, yeah, Thief has one, I think Rev has one, and not many people were able to name off many other stun breaks in the game that had cast time, so that was a big surprise. So the next thing is mount plus golem. Every time that you dismount, it comes crashing down. I'm sure that'll be fixed in the future, but you mount, it will fly into space, and you dismount and it will crash down, and you could literally just run around a low-level area and just keep using this to crush mobs. So I would honestly just say that that's a glitch. I'm sure it'll be fixed. The next thing is water. This was really disappointing. Here's our golem. If we go in water, it vanishes. Now, at first I was like, oh, well, it's probably just a bug. They'll work on that later. You get a skill called Mech Support Depth Charges. Request a barrage from your mech on the target foe. If you hit it, a bunch of bombs come down from above. That's it. So that kind of was alarming to me. That means that they intentionally made this. So we've got an entire line devoted to having a robot pet, and you can't use the pet underwater. Now, that would basically mean, like, let's say I'm in a group for running fractals, and the underwater fractal comes up. I gotta swap to a different build. And if I was the Alacrity guy, we gotta find somebody else to do it. Like, I can't use the mace to provide barrier. I don't have the pet doing barrier engine. I don't have the pet for barrier burst. I don't have the pet for crisis zone. The only way I have to supply some barrier is this, but that is not nearly enough for 100% uptime. It's gonna be like, I don't know, 25, yeah, it looks like 25% uptime of Alacrity with that. So I really hope that the depth charges thing is replaced by just let me use the pet underwater. You can even use the same graphic, just let me use the pet underwater. Like there are some classes that can't use some things underwater. I mean, some of them are obvious. I can't use the flamethrower underwater. I can't use shift signet underwater, the flame turret and all that. Okay, fine. But the class defining thing that without it, the whole specialization doesn't work should not be limited in that way, in my opinion. One other small issue I hit with the medkit is if you use medkit, I've already mentioned that your heal skill goes to F1, and you don't have F1 because of the pet bar, is this trait here. Grants protection to nearby allies when you use a heal skill. When it says a heal skill, it means your 6 key, and we don't have that. It will not work. So like if I go here, I'm a scrapper now, and I hit this button here, there's the protection. That is from reconstruction enclosure. But if I go back to this, I literally cannot proc this. Now, it wouldn't be the end of the world if it just stayed that way. It's kind of a bummer because it's basically just Mechanist plus medkit plus that trait equals, and that's the formula. But would like it if they made it to where, make it proc on explosive knuckle or something, just so we can keep up protection on a party. Just with this combination, it would be nice. Just be like, okay, well, it's the F1, that's the F1 now, do that. The cooldown is only 2 seconds difference. That would be nice, but not required. As far as gameplay and raids goes, I was pretty much swinging my mace anytime that I needed to just provide barrier to the party, or there wasn't something better to do because of the every third hit providing barrier and doing some damage. I was making sure to keep the F2 and F3 on cooldown in order to provide boons to everybody. If we needed more barrier, I would use the barrier signet. It was only 24-second cooldown, so I used it quite often. F1 if there was nothing better for the pet to do because it just did some weakness and a bit of damage, but didn't provide any buffs or boons, and I was the support, so that was my job. If health bars were actively taking a lot of damage, we would whip out the medkit and we would start spritzing water everywhere. And then once health bars got stabilized, we swapped back to mace and continued barrier generation. The 4 and 5 with the shield provided protection, so I would hit those buttons if there was no times where we needed to do interrupts coming up. Except on Samurag, I brought personal battering ram along with mace 3 for interrupts, and I was able to just spam shield skills to pulse out protection anytime I felt like doing so. The rest of my focus basically was just making sure the pet was with us whenever we needed to move around. Sometimes I would use shift signet for that, and other other times I would just call it over to me by clicking return to me and then trying to get it to attack again from its new location to make sure that those boons were hitting everybody that they needed to be hitting. As mentioned before, the only time the pet died on me was on Veil Guardian after 2 greens blew up, where I wasn't able to heal both the raid and the mech in between the two. Another interesting thing that I just remembered was Cairn. On Cairn, my pet was affected by the debuff that affects players that reduces their speed down to 99% reduced speed, so you're moving at 1% speed if you move around too much. So I was very surprised to see that hit him, because I don't think it affects ranger pets, but you guys can tell me in the comments down below if I'm misremembering. I certainly never had to watch my ranger pet when I played Druid on that fight nearly as much as I had to watch the mech, so it's possible that I just missed it. However, on Mersot Overseer, the chest piece, I checked on purpose to see if he would die to the spikes that will one-shot kill players. He did not. He is not considered a player in that fight, so he is not getting one-shot by the spikes, which was wonderful. I didn't have to worry about that. I wanted to also test to see if he would trigger the oil on Deimos, but our group had to break up before we got there, so I did not get to check that. All in all, I had a lot of fun, and of all the classes for the beta events so far, all 9 of them, this is the one I love the most right now. This video primarily focused on a heal tank Alacrity Mechanist in a raid environment. I have also done a lot of conquest matches with the Mechanist, and I plan on trying some PvE DPS in the near future, and I'm going to use those for similar critique videos as well. But once again, if any of you want to try it before the beta is over, there's the build. Like I said, I swapped out this utility skill multiple times depending on the fight, either for another interrupt or elsewise, and I was running a mixture of Givers and Minstrel's gear. I had 1 Sigil of Concentration. I would put Sigil of Transference here, but again, I failed to prepare one before the beta, and I was running Runes of the Monk. And that was the results we got. I didn't even have 100% boon duration. You probably don't even need it. Another thing that just came to mind that I forgot to mention earlier is because of the very rare 100% uptime on Vigor that this build provides, this can actually allow certain classes, such as the Mirage, who can turn their dodges into bonus damage, to do more damage. So if you've got this as one of the healers in your raid, and you've got some, Mirages in your raid, or any other class that can use dodges for damage, like the Future Vindicators, put them in the group with this guy. He will allow them to dodge as much as humanly possible, because 100% uptime on Vigor. So that is another, rare treat for this fella. But I am looking forward to playing this more in the future. In Fractals, I imagine I would have like a support tank Scrapper and a support tank Mechanist, and I would just swap between them based on if we need quickness or Alacrity or Barrier or Super Speed or Stealth, whatever. It's something for every job, and it would be very easy to have a 10-man engineer group in the future. All right, I'm gushing, and I'll have another video coming out on my time and experiences with this in Conquest very soon.